Okay, we're back. The bread has been in the oven proofing, and we've punched it down 3 times, and now we are at the point where we're going to put the bread in pans. So it's been about an hour from when we mix the dough to when we're at the point where we can put it into pans. So here's, remember what it looked like before? Here's what it looks like now with the towels over it. So that bread has grown, improved that much. So remember, that was about 5.5 cups of water into this dough, and the plastic, as you see, is sticking a little bit. So we'll pull that off, put my tea towels to the side, and remember how pliable that dough was when we started the rising process, and now how sticky it's become. So that's when you know this is a good batch, because the gluten is doing its job, and that's what makes your buns light and fluffy when they're all finished. So if your dough doesn't get sticky and doesn't grow a lot, you know that maybe your yeast was not good, or perhaps your water was too hot. And I'm just going to pop that plastic into the garbage. Okay, so you don't have to punch the bread down at this point, but it's just a little messy for me. So what I usually do is I usually make my buns first, and then I use whatever kind of dough is left over to make cinnamon buns. So I've got 3 pans that I'm going to do for buns, and so I've just taken my cookie sheets and I've lined them with parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, just take a little bit of oil, and I just sort of keep a little bit in my jar and just take the brush and just lightly grease the sheet so your buns don't stick to the bottom. And then we are going to start cutting the buns off. So we need sometimes a little bit of flour on the work surface is a good idea so they don't stick. So I'm just going to flour this, and then a nice sharp knife for you to start cutting the size of the buns. And so it depends on how, like if you want to make hamburger buns, you're going to make these a different shape than if you want to make hot dog buns, you're going to make them a different shape. And so if you're just going to make rolls, you can figure out how big you want those rolls. So this dough was rising pretty good, so I'm only going to make them approximately that big, is approximately how big you want the bun before you do it. And so you're just simply rolling, just like we were kneading, pulling one side in, pushing into the center, one in, pushing to the center. And you can hear the air squeaking out as you do that. And then we're just going to put it on the pan. So I got my pan over there. And so we're gonna roll, those cookie sheets can tend to take, usually I can do 3 rows across and 4 or 5 rows down. So I'm gonna just pre-cut another 11 buns, and then we'll roll them all and get them onto the pan. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One more. And they won't be exactly the same size, but as you're rolling them, and if you see one's bigger or smaller than the other, then you can just grab a little bit of dough. But they don't have to be, unless you're entering them in a baking contest, having them all the same size isn't necessary. You want them all approximately the same size, or they'll vary in baking, so you do kind of want them approximately the same size. And we're just going to quickly, and if you're doing this with the kids and they can't roll the dough like this, it's fine if they just roll it into their hands and put that bun on the cookie sheet. So you can modify the technique. This is kind of how we roll the buns. Get them on the sheet. I'm just going to do these quickly so that you can see what the finished sheet will look like in terms of spacing, and then I'll show you the sheet in a next video, how they've grown before we put them into the oven. So pay attention to how these are spaced, and you'll be able to see them in the next video. Making bread, particularly does the technique, and that's why I showed you the sort of what you want your dough to look like, because it's different for your altitude, it's different for the temperature in the room, and so that's why it's sort of more important to sort of get the feel of what your dough needs to feel like when it's done, because sometimes with, you know, and you can look up in your area baking changes for the altitude, and you can basically put in your altitude for where you're living or where you want to do the baking, and it will tell you sort of what sorts of adjustments you normally would make for the altitude. And see, these are too tiny, so I'm just going to grab a little bit more dough and make them a little bit bigger, closer to the other size of the other two. This one too tiny, so I'm just going to throw a little bit more dough in it from the pan to make it a little bit larger. And if you have a look at my pan, see, I have room for another row right here, so I'm going to just spread these out a little bit more. Some people don't like it when their buns grow together, other people don't care, so how much spacing you have there is somewhat determined by how, if you want your buns to grow together and touch each other or not. So I'm just going to do 3 more. One more row. I'm gonna put some more flour on my counter, getting it to stick. And so there is the pan done. And we just are going to put a tea towel over it, some clean tea towel, so that they don't get crusty on the top or dry out. And then we're going to set them over on a warm spot. And sometimes if you've got a little bit of a sunshine or sunbeam coming in, putting them up where it's nice and warm. And we're going to let them rise for an hour before we pop them in the oven. So I'm going to put the rest of these in pans, and then in the next video I will show you how to make the cinnamon buns. Talk soon.